Our next topic is matter cycles. So our objective for this lesson is to describe the parts of the three major matter cycles and to compare the flow of energy to the flow of matter in an ecosystem. So why are matter cycles important to us? All of the three major matter cycles, and by that we mean water, carbon, and nitrogen, are required for us and all other living organisms to survive. So when we disrupt those cycles, we can potentially actually limit our access to clean drinking water and enough food to feed ourselves and enough food for all the other organisms that also depend on these cycles to live. So the three major matter cycles are nitrogen, water, and carbon. And again, the main things here that these impact are water, our access to clean drinking water for ourselves, our animals, and even plants, crops we grow. Nitrogen is another important one for our crops, and we also depend on our crops to feed our livestock and ourselves. So that's really important as well. And finally, carbon is really important in helping to regulate the climate of Earth, and we're going to talk about that at the very end, what's occurring with changes to the carbon cycle. So we're going to start with the matter cycle, or excuse me, the water cycle. Obviously, it's a matter cycle. And if you don't remember from chemistry in middle school, right, matter is anything that has mass. Okay, so water is one of those things. If you look at your diagram on your notes page, you can see you have a few blanks there that you need to fill in. We're going to start here with the ocean, or this could be potentially a big lake, right? From any standing body of water, you can have evaporation. And evaporation is just a liquid turning into a gas. So water evaporates from oceans, lakes, that sort of thing, and goes into the atmosphere. Once it's in the atmosphere, it can condense, okay, through the process of condensation to form clouds, okay? Water can also enter the atmosphere through something called transpiration, and that is the evaporation of water from plants. So when plants soak up water from their roots, some of it isn't used, and that extra water that they don't use leaves through their leaves and goes up into the atmosphere. Again, it can condense into clouds, and when you have enough water in the atmosphere from either of these two processes, then you get precipitation. Falls back to the earth as liquid water, rain, or it could potentially be snow or hail, sleet. Okay, it's just water leaving the atmosphere and coming back to the earth. So make sure you have all those filled in your diagram. And as far as your definitions go, they are right here. Okay, remember we said transpiration is the evaporation of water from the leaves of plants. Okay, maybe you could think of it as, I don't know, treespiration, right? Evaporation from trees. Precipitation, we said, was when water falls from the atmosphere. It could be rain, snow, hail, sleet, freezing rain, any of that sort of thing. And evaporation is when water in liquid form converts to a gas. So what I want you to think about for a minute is, what do you think this sentence means? In a very real sense, plants in rainforests create their own rain. So think about that for a second, okay, and try and work through the process. So if they're creating their rain, where does the rain come from? It comes from the atmosphere, right? So in order for the rain to come from the atmosphere, there has to be water in the atmosphere. How does water get to the atmosphere? Two processes, right? You either have evaporation or you have transpiration. If they're saying in this sense that plants are creating their own rain, then which of those two processes do you think they're talking about? Talking about transpiration, right? Comes from trees, plants. So when they say plants in the rainforest create their own rain, we're talking about transpiration, water leaving plants going into the atmosphere, condenses, forms a cloud, enough water in that cloud, finally you get precipitation, it comes back down onto those trees in the rainforest. Okay, so that is a good example of the water cycle in action. All right, moving on to the carbon cycle. Again, you have your diagram here that you need to fill out. A couple major points here. Carbon dioxide exists in the atmosphere, okay? That is how carbon exists in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, or CO2. It gets there in a couple different ways. Okay, it can get there from combustion of fossil fuels. So you see here fossil fuels exist in the ground. We can dig those up and burn them to create energy. And we get combustion of those fossil fuels. It releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Another way that we can get carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere is through a process called cellular respiration. And this is pretty much how both plants and animals get energy out of their food. So all organisms do this, release carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And decomposition also releases carbon dioxide as well. Sometimes they go straight into fossil fuels, they get released in the atmosphere. Okay, so 3 different ways that carbon enters the atmosphere: cellular respiration, combustion, and decomposition. There is only one process that takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and that is photosynthesis, which is done by plants. Okay, this is how plants get energy from the sun, and they take in carbon dioxide and they give off oxygen. So that's the only way that we're getting any carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, is through photosynthesis. So this is why we talk about trees and plants in general being really important. So here's your definitions once you filled in everything on your chart. Remember, we said photosynthesis is a process that uses light energy to convert carbon dioxide into sugar. So they're taking the carbon dioxide from the air and they're using sunlight and they're making sugars. Cellular respiration is how we break down those sugars, those foods, to make energy in our bodies, and that process releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Combustion, we said, is the burning of fossil fuels, and by that we mean oil and coal, things like that, your car running and electricity going in your house. That also releases carbon dioxide. And finally, decomposition, which is breaking down of dead organisms. So if you remember the decomposers from the first set of notes, right? Decomposers break down dead organisms. Okay, so that process is called decomposition, and it releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as well. So we said before, remember, that carbon exists in the atmosphere in the form of the gas carbon dioxide. Okay, you should be able to answer number 3 on your notes page. It says name 2 processes that release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. You got 3 to choose from. So go back up, look at your definitions, and pick 2. Next question asks you to think about whether or not in the wintertime there will be more or less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So think about it for a second. Do trees take in carbon dioxide, or do they release carbon dioxide? They take in carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, okay? But in the wintertime, many trees don't have their leaves, and if they don't have their leaves, they can't do photosynthesis. So if they can't do photosynthesis, then what is happening to that carbon dioxide? Is it going into the tree anymore? No, it's not going to the tree anymore. It's staying in the atmosphere. So what is going to happen to the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? There would be more. Okay, so make sure you wrap your head around that. You need to know the relationship between trees and all plants, right? Whether they're doing photosynthesis or not, and what effect that has on the atmosphere. Okay, same thing happens when deforestation occurs. If there's no trees, they can't do photosynthesis. They're not taking any carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So that means the amount in the atmosphere will go up. All right, the last cycle that we have to look at is the nitrogen cycle. There's a very little bit of the nitrogen cycle that you need to know. although the nitrogen cycle is very important. If the nitrogen cycle did not occur, our plants would not be able to grow, any of them, okay? So that means we have nothing to eat. Even if you just eat meat, the things that you're eating, right, the meat, they had to have eaten plants at some point. So nitrogen cycle, very important. The one major process in the nitrogen cycle that you need to know is called nitrogen fixation. Okay, so go ahead and put that in on your diagram in the appropriate place. And what nitrogen fixation is when bacteria move nitrogen that's in the air into the soil. Okay, so this is the only way that we can get nitrogen from the air back into the soil. And this is really important because the nitrogen in the soil is used by plants to make proteins and all sorts of things that they need in order to survive. Okay? Only bacteria can do this. Okay, so bacteria are really important to the nitrogen cycle. They're so important that some plants have actually developed little homes, okay? They're called nodules. They're little openings in their roots where the bacteria can actually grow. So they give the bacteria a place to live, and the bacteria sit in there and they do nitrogen fixation, which gives the plants nitrogen to use. Okay, and I'll let you think about that later when we talk about relationships in ecosystems, and you can try and figure out what type of relationship that would be. Okay, so those are your three matter cycles. You have nitrogen, carbon, and water. So they just go round and round and round over and over again. Okay, you don't get more, you don't get less. It's the same amount. It's just a question of where it is in the cycle. What I want you to think about next is how that compares to the flow of energy. So take a look at this diagram. Does it look like the energy gets recycled over and over? Or does it look like energy gets used and then it's gone? Okay, you should have figured out here, hopefully, that energy gets used and then it goes away, right? We have to continually get energy from the sun here. Our producers turn that into something that our herbivores can eat and get energy from. And then that moves up to our carnivores and our next carnivores. But you can see we are losing this energy at every step of our energy pyramid. Okay, if we just drew a triangle around this, this would be a lovely little energy pyramid. We are losing energy at each step of this, okay, and that's for a couple reasons. One is we're losing some energy just as heat. Living organisms produce heat just by living. Okay, so some heat gets lost that way to the atmosphere. And also those organisms need that energy to reproduce, to run away from a predator, whatever it is that they have to be doing at that point in their life. So energy does not get recycled in an ecosystem, okay? It gets used and then it's gone, which is why the sun is so important to us, because we have to keep getting energy from it every day. So last thing I want to talk about here is human impact on matter cycles. We're going to look at the carbon cycle specifically. And carbon dioxide is part of the carbon cycle. And what we're going to look at is something called the greenhouse effect. And this is just a way that the atmosphere stays warm, keeps the earth warm for us. Carbon dioxide holds heat in, just like in a greenhouse, right? Or in your car, it gets hot on a sunny day. The problem is when we have too much carbon dioxide, it gets too hot. So we're getting issues with ice melting and changes to our oceans and things like that going on. Okay, climate change. So natural greenhouse effect is good. We have to have some to keep us warm, some carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But when we have too much, it's a bad thing, okay? And this is from the burning of fossil fuels. We're putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere from that. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and show, if you're listening to this, you just got the gist of it. But if you're just watching on PowerPoint, I'm going to show the next two for people who aren't listening. And it pretty much just says the same thing that I just said, but written out. So if you didn't get something, go back and read over it, look over it again. If you need to, go back and rewind the video, stop, pause, play, whatever, rewatch, and get your notes filled out.